Here at West Bank, we're really excited to sponsor Real Success, a new CBJ series featuring Iowa City's own Nate Kaeding. 2018 marks West Bank's 125th year of helping business owners and entrepreneurs find their own versions of success, whether that be opening a new store, planning for retirement, or anything in between. Please enjoy this edition of Real Success, hosted by Nate Kaeding, and thanks for watching.
Dave, thanks a lot for joining us for another edition of Real Success with the Corridor Business Journal. We're here in the beautiful Perrine Room here on Coe College's campus, and you can see surrounded by these awesome Grant Wood paintings. Like we were talking about before, I was in New York City when these pictures were up in the Whitney Museum, which was an amazing credit to the state of Iowa and Grant Wood's work, and a really neat setup here in the room. Thank you for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. Happy to have the chance to talk with you, and like you, very proud of Iowa when these were on display in New York.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Like we do with every session, we want to talk, kind of deconstruct what makes a successful professional or a successful person. Someone like yourself who's been in higher education, in and around learning, really your entire professional career. You got started, I think, in 1986 at Allegheny College. So I think anyone here in the corridor area that knows education and learning, I don't know if there's anybody that knows it much better than you. So I think I'd like to focus a little bit today on just kind of the art of learning, why it's important, what makes a successful learner, and kind of deconstruct that one element of what makes those people successful. So just kind of get started, talk a little bit about in the past 30 plus years in from your professional perspective, how has learning changed, or the act of learning changed?
Oh, it's changed a lot,
yeah.
And that's a great question. I've always thought it's kind of strange that I work in higher education, because no one in my family had ever been to college, didn't know much about what education could do. Mm-hmm. But I admit that, this wasn't the coolest thing in high school, I guess, to admit, so I kept it to myself. I thought learning was a lot of fun. Right. And so even though some courses could be difficult, just the opportunity to acquire knowledge or skills. Sure. And so that led me to, once I went to college, to want to be in a college environment. Mm-hmm. And so I'd say one of the things that's changed the most is learning at that time was faculty-centered, mm-hmm. and now it's student-centered. Okay. And so there are probably 100 things that have happened in between or more that would be examples of that. It really is a sea change, a fundamental difference in how classes are approached. And obviously technology has come in to the picture, economic circumstances mm-hmm. affect that. In higher ed, for example, much of it used to be funded by the government, now most of it is funded by students and their families. Right. But in terms of what happens in the classroom, there is much less time spent on lecture, mm-hmm.
much
more spent on engaging activities that pull the students into discussion, into leading their own projects, into independent research, that kind of thing.
Sure. So thinking of a successful learner or a good learner today in 2018, what are a couple of characteristics you would tick off that make someone a good learner?
I put engagement at the top of the list. And it's funny, advice I know that our student athletes used to get is, sit in the front of the room so the professor knows that you're paying attention. Yeah. And so whether they were or not, it looks like they were. Yeah. But in fact, that does it's harder to tune out what you're hearing, or to choose not to participate when you're just figuratively in the front of the room.
Sure.
When you're engaged in it. So if you want to be successful, it comes down to not just acquiring information, but making meaning of it. Mm-hmm. So I've learned this fact. Why is that important for me to know? Right. How does it connect to other things I've learned in other classes? How might it apply to my life? And obviously we learn a lot of information where we don't immediately see that. Right. I don't know how many people have told me over the years as learners, I don't need to learn calculus mm-hmm. or trigonometry because I'm going to be a writer. Well, that's a superficial way of looking at it.
Sure.
Because you do need to learn quantitative reasoning skills that are that you pick up in those classes. You need to learn them if you're going to be a good citizen, if you're going to manage your own family's finances, whatever it might be. And so I put engagement at the top of the list.
Okay. And have you seen, again, over the last 30 years, have you seen that to be more of a challenge to get students to be engaged? I mean, are you seeing, you mentioned technology, and obviously that has infinite amount of benefits to learning and how you learn and acquiring knowledge, but it also can make it kind of tough to be engaged. I mean, there's some talk now about classrooms and eliminating laptops because kids are checking Facebook when they think, the teacher may think they're taking notes. I mean, have you seen it to become more of a challenge to get people to be engaged in the classroom and the learning environment?
I don't think it's more of a challenge. I think it's just a different kind of challenge. And something like technology, you can't turn the clock back. So it's a question, if you're a faculty member, of how do I use this? How do I incorporate it into the way I communicate with students?
Right.
And if you are creative in doing that, you can actually engage students more. I think most students would prefer to be engaged. They might not be thrilled by what they need to learn or memorize for an exam or something, but it's a lot more interesting to go to class and participate in a discussion than it is to sit quietly and listen to a lecture.
Yeah, and I think you hit on in a great point about the democracy needing all the citizens to be educated enough and synthesize information where they can make informed decisions.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to get too political, but if you were to kind of look at, if you could kind of wave your magic wand across the American populace and said, I wish more people knew more about this or spent more time learning about that. I mean, could you pinpoint one or two things that if you could be the president of the University of the United States of America, what would you make as mandatory classes for them?
Well, I think the need is greater than ever, by the way.
Yeah.
That may be counterintuitive. We might have thought at one point, as more information is more widely available, people will be better informed to make better decisions. In fact,
there's the paradox.
That's right.
That's a good
we're
point.
kind of drowning in that information, and so we need this skill more than ever. And so if I did have that magic wand, I would want us all to recognize that complex problems are usually not solved with a simple or superficial solution.
Yep. How about talking a bit about postgraduate? Everybody, someone comes into Coe, they leave with a degree. What are some characteristics of sort of lifelong learners or people? I mean, if you were to characterize or hiring someone on your faculty, I mean, learning doesn't stop here when you get that degree. I mean, talk a bit about learning after the traditional academic experience.
One of the things that gets me most excited about this is I believe that a college is a great place to be, fun place to be, stimulating in all kinds of ways. But our greatest impact isn't what happens here. It's the hundreds of students who leave here every year and go into their communities or their workplaces or their families and lead or contribute in a way that is more meaningful, more aware of the needs of others and of society as a whole than it would have been if they hadn't had their education. And so I think for me the first characteristic of a lifelong learner is one who sees the common good as their responsibility.
Right.
And the ability to solve problems and to communicate and to collaborate successfully in a global society. Those are the skills that will always be needed, no matter what field they go into. And,
not to get too deep into the tip Coe's hat on your strategic plan or anything, but as the competitive landscape has changed, obviously, with online education and distance learning and just a variety of other opportunities for people to continue their education post-high school. I mean, what are a couple of those ways that Coe has kind of fortified their business model here? How have you made kind of in-person learning the place to come when you have other options outside of that?
That's a great question. And personally, I celebrate all of those forms of education because we still have a lot more people who would like to have more education than are able to get it.
Right.
And so I don't think we have to worry about an abundance of other opportunities. But I do think it's important in any organization to know what you do well, know who you are, and then try to do that better than anybody else. So for us, that's residential education, entirely undergraduate, at least for now, in Coe. And so that there is still a very big demand for that. And so those other educational resources exist, but they're integrated. They don't replace face-to-face education. The technology, the online courses, they can be used within a face-to-face setting.
Sure. So if you were to kind of fast forward 30 years from now, how we learn, not only as students here in a university setting, but you and I as professionals beyond that, how do you envision learning changing 30 years from now, if we were to kind of go forward that far in time?
Well, I think if we were to extrapolate the trends we see now, it will be more self-directed. People will sample from a lot more places.
Okay.
Long before they get to higher education, or maybe even secondary education, they'll have figured out how to get all information that they could possibly need.
Right.
So learning will instead be about problem solving, about group work, about research, about creativity, learning to ask the right questions, much more than it will be about faculty-directed information. So that is, we don't know what that will look like yet, but with other substantial changes to society in the past, humans have adapted to it, whether it's an agricultural revolution or industrial revolution or whatever it might be. And I think the same will be true for the information age, but that people will draw information from many sources rather than say, I went to this school and I learned all I need to know there.
Sure. Great. Then the final question, just in one sentence, how do you define success?
I define success as serving the greater good, no matter what your organization or industry or your role in an organization, and leaving it better than you found it.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's my pleasure.
Conversation.